all on. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Boker Tov, Chodesh Tov. Welcome. Great to have you this morning. Great to get together, although not exactly physically in person. But it's exciting to begin this new Zman, Rosh Chodesh Cheshvan, Tov Shin Pei Aleph, together with all of you. Let's go outside. Let's, outside our front door, walk to the mailbox. For some of us, it's attached to the front of our house. For others, we don't even have to go outside. It's just that slat, that little opening in the door. For some of us, you know, like the old school, you walk down the patio, out the front steps, down that little path, and the mailbox on the post. You open the front door of that mailbox, and you pull out a letter. You pull out a letter, and it is addressed on the return side, on that top left corner, from a very prominent person, from one of the most important, distinguished Jewish personalities. And you open this letter, and you realize that it is a historic document. And it is a letter that you read with great interest and realize it should be read and considered and thought about for many years, maybe even 62 years. And that's what we're going to do today. And that's really what we're going to do this year. We are going to study a letter and all of the ripple effects that are associated with this letter. So you might be thinking to yourself, why? Why are we studying this letter this year, if at all? And we always have to begin with why. This is the great teaching that Rashi taught us in the beginning of yesterday's parsha. In Bereshis, the letter base is bishvil. It's for the purpose of something. When we begin the Torah, we have to know that our life is bishvil haTorah shenikra Bereshis. The world is for a purpose. We have a purpose. This limud, our shir, our learning together every week, hopefully back in person soon for many of us, it's got a purpose. So why are we studying this letter and all that goes together with it? Because the hope is, the aspiration and the goal, the why, so that we can actually deepen and grow our connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu through this journey. Last year, we spent the entire year focused on cities of Israel, and there the purpose was also to strengthen our connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu through our appreciation of the land of Israel, the places of Israel, the meaning of these makomos. And so this year, we're going to continue our focus connected with Israel, but in a very different way, and thinking about a different question. To introduce this letter and this issue, I want to give some historical background, but even before that, before some historical context, and this week we're just focusing on introducing this letter that we're going to open together. The letter it poses a question. And whenever we think about a question, we can think about what does it mean when someone asks a question and what is beneath that question? What else is part of that discussion when there is a question? What do we even mean really when we say someone has a question? And I think about this, and some of you may be familiar with this from a really interesting perspective. I'm sure this will resonate with many people in your own lives in different ways. But the idea that questions often have something beneath them that are much deeper, which is what we're going to be getting at, of course, is explained in a passage right at the beginning of a book called Who is Man? By Heschel, where Heschel begins his book by saying, to ask a question is an act of the intellect. Right? We're going to open this letter together in the mailbox. The letter is going to have a question. So that question, whenever we ask questions, we are acting with our intellect. But Heschel introduces us to another aspect, to a different dimension. And I don't think you should get hung up on the word because the word has specific connotations, but it's the idea that I hope you'll think about. To ask a question is an act of the intellect. To face a problem is a situation involving the whole person. The difference between a question and a problem. A question is the result of thirst for knowledge. A problem reflects a state of perplexity or even distress. A question calls for an answer. A problem calls for a solution. From the Latin solvere, to loosen or to dissolve. Very interesting idea. That when we think about a question, it's an abstract quest for an answer. But when we face a problem, which is at the deep recess or the root of that question, we have to come up with a solution. No genuine problem comes into being out of sheer inquisitiveness. We don't walk out the door in the morning and struggle with, some kind of just inquisitive question. At least most people don't. A problem is the outcome of a situation, right? Think about this in our own lives. A problem is the outcome of a situation. It comes to pass in moments of being in straits, of intellectual embarrassment, in experiencing tension, conflict, contradiction. Now, when we go back and think about our learning and teachings that we have really absorbed, I go back to the shtickle Torah that I've heard from Rav Soloveitchik, and I'm like, you know what? The truth is, you're right. The Rav wasn't just asking, was he asking a question, or was he struggling with a problem, right? For the Rav to answer this issue, it wasn't just an abstract question. It was a problem. It was an issue that needed to be solved. To understand the meaning of the problem and to appreciate its urgency, we must keep alive in our reflection the situation of stress and strain in which it comes to pass. Someone who loves learning, when they get to that difficult passage, they're in stress, they're in distress, they're struggling. Genesis and birth pangs, motivation, the face of perplexity, the varieties of experiencing, the necessity of confronting and being preoccupied. To clarify, says Heschel, to study and to communicate a problem, we must put it into words. For without translating the moments of wondering into logical terms, there would be no possibility of testing the transsubjective validity of what is thought in these moments, nor the possibility of its intersubjective communication. Yet, right, we put the question into words, yet the act of verbalization extracts the problem for the situation in which it arises. When you ask the question in this cold, distant, disconnected way, you've actually extracted it from the circumstance, from the problem, from the tension. The question verbalized, however, must not be equated with the problem confronting us. The danger always exists of these moments becoming distorted and even lost in the process of translation from situation to conceptualization. What an interesting way to think about questions. Is this question being taken out of context? Have you lost the emotional charge that goes with this question? Too often, speculation becomes analysis by long distance of sounds transmitted over a poor connection. We formulate and debate the issues while oblivious to and alienated from the experiences or the insights which account for our raising the issues. The difference between a question and a problem. The question that we're going to read today in this letter, it is a question, but it really is about a problem. It's really about a situation, a circumstance. And although this circumstance, which we will discuss the context of today, it arose 62 years ago, and now you could say, oh, we're in 2020, we're in Tufshin Pealis. We're going to study this question, as an academic inquiry. So first of all, our learning has never been an academic inquiry. That's not why we're here. We're here to understand the Devar Hashem, to connect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But what I'm hoping that we will glean is that we will come to realize that this question is really a problem, and that's going to be obvious when you read the question, when you read the letter. But it's not just a problem that once upon a time it was somebody's issue. Somebody needed to deal with this. It was a loaded question. But that it's a problem, an issue that needs to be dealt with, considered, and struggled with today, but not just on a macro level. It's a problem, it's an issue that we need to think about for ourselves. How does it relate to us? How do we feel about this? Part of our goal in learning this letter and in thinking about this issue is that we should take this from the realm of a question that we have, and it should become a problem. And not only that, it shouldn't just be somebody else's question that becomes somebody else's problem or issue. It should become our question and our issue. There was a guy who tells a story that he was once in a car ride with Eli Wiesel, the Zichrono Livracha. And he asked Eli Wiesel, what are things that he learned from his experience in the Holocaust? You can imagine what an audacious question. Eli Wiesel wrote and taught and lived so much about the Shoah. He said, well, what lessons did you learn? So one lesson, he told him two things. One thing that Eli Wiesel told the guy is that he learned not to have somebody else's questions be your questions. You don't have to ask other people's questions. You don't have to answer them. You have to figure out your own questions and your own answers. So Rabbi Heschel, Zichrono Livracha, says to us, think about what is a question and what is a problem. Eli Wiesel thinks about, is this my question? Is it my problem? The goal is, I think, that it should. It should get us thinking, what is our question and what is our problem? That's our goal. And hopefully this will spark conversation and thought and introspection and connection with the Ribbono Shel Olam in new ways that we never considered before. And so over the course of this year, this question is going to unfold into this problem. It's our Sunday morning problem. Every week, Mir Hashem, we're going to come back to some aspect of this. In doing so, we're going to deepen our own spiritual journey. That's the why. That's why we're doing this. So we're going to open this letter. The letter is going to be written by a very famous Jew. His name is David Ben Gurion. The letter is written, and some of you have it. I'm going to share it on the screen shortly. The letter is written and dated Yerushalayim Yud Gimel B'Cheshvan Tafshin Yud Tes, 27th of October, 1958. That's the letter we're going to open together. What's the story? Why is David Ben Gurion writing a letter in October of 1958? So to understand that, we're going to walk through this morning a timeline. And let's see if you can see this on the screen. Thumbs up if you can see it. Yes, okay, great. So you have a presentation, this multimedia presentation, which is on the screen, which we're going to walk through together to give us some background to our letter today. The beginnings of this letter, the origins, you could say, go back to the foundations of the Jewish people, to Avram Avinu, to the giving of the Torah at Sinai. But let's fast forward to modern history, to 1922. In 1922, there was an established order from the British government. This order from the British government was presided over by a group of ministers who proclaimed, this is 1922, right? We're past the Balfour Declaration. We're about to be the UN, I'm zooming in so you can read it, the UN resolution. 1922, this document. The document is called the Palestine Order in Council for August 10th, 1922. And in here, you will find a set of sentences right here in number 51, right before you see it on the screen. I'm going to read it out, don't worry. The civil court, says the British government, shall not exercise any jurisdiction in any proceeding whatsoever over the High Commissioner or his official or other residence or his official or other property. Number one, the civil courts are going to stay away from the High Commissioner, but now the civil courts are also, number 51, subject to the provisions of Article 64 to 67, inclusive jurisdictions in matters of personal status shall be exercised in accordance with the provisions of this part of the courts of the religious communities established and exercising jurisdiction at the date of this order. For the purpose of these provisions, matters of personal status means suits regarding marriage or divorce, alimony, maintenance, guardianship, legitimation, and adoption of minors, inhibition from dealing with property of persons who are legally incompetent, successions, wills, and legacies, and the administration of the property of absent persons. So 52 talks about Muslims. 53, the rabbinical courts of the Jewish community shall have exclusive jurisdiction in the matters of marriage and divorce, alimony, and confirmation of wills of members of their community other than foreigners, as defined in Article 59. Jurisdiction in other matters of personal status of such person where all the parties to the action consent to their jurisdiction. Exclusive jurisdiction over any case to the constitution or internal administration of a waqf or religious endowment constituted before the rabbinical court according to Jewish law. So the British decide in 1922 that issues related to religious life, to religious identity, religious questions of status belong in the realm, they belong under the purview of religious courts. Fast forward, 1948, Hey ER, here we are, as you see on the screen, we have this beautiful hall decked out in Tel Aviv. You've got giant poster of Uncle Ted, Theodore Herzl, you see him right there. You have the Israeli flags, you have Ben Gurion, you have the whole delegation. It's Friday afternoon and we are ready for independence. Hakamas HaMedina. With Hakamas HaMedina comes this announcement or this declaration, which actually was took several iterations until, of course, it was finalized. Be'eretz Yisrael kama Am HaYehudi. In the land of Israel came the Jewish people, etc. This is the Megillat HaAtzmaut. You scroll down, Lefikav, therefore we gather together and we are establishing Medinat Yisrael, the Jewish state. And what is it? What is this state? It is a place la'aliyah Yehudit u'lekibbutz galuyot. That is a place of the ingathering of the exiles for all Jews. It is a place for Jews to come home. This is Hakamat Medinat Yisrael. Hakamat HaMedina is a place for all Jews to come home. That's what it says in Megillat HaAtzmaut, La'aliyah HaYehudit. At the same time, as we know, Israel is established as a democratic country. So here we are in 1948, establishing, in light of and on the basis of British law, which precedes the state, we are establishing a democratic state as a place where all Jews can come back to. Well, what exactly does that mean, that it is a place for all Jews to come back to? So in 1950, the Knesset gets together. Some of you are familiar. You see on the screen a picture. This is on Rehov King George. Some of you are familiar with this building, Mishkana Shel Knesset Yisrael, home of the Israeli Knesset, March 1950. I think it says March 15th till August 10th, 1966. Some of you have passed by this in a visit to Israel. So during this time, the Knesset was gathering in this building on King George Street before the beautiful Knesset building that we know today stands. It was established in 1966. In July 5th of 1950, the Knesset got together. And if you have it on the screen, it's awesome. If not, don't worry, I'm going to read it out to you. So one of the things that's amazing, thanks to the incredible opportunity that we have to utilize technology today, is to connect with the Knesset. You can go online and you can actually access, and that's what we have posted on the screen now on this Prezi, the deliberations, the transcription that the stenographer wrote of exactly what happened every day that the Knesset deliberated over the past decades. So what you are looking at right here in front of you is the actual typed up deliberations from Hayeshiva Hamea V'Shishim Ushtayim, the 162nd gathering, Shel HaKnesset HaRishonah. And when I read this document, as someone who is just an interested person in history, Yes, I have a degree in history. I'm not a historian, but I find it's absolutely fascinating. You get a window into, and you close your eyes, you imagine all these Jews, these European Jews, and different types and different stripes and the different perspectives, and they're all sitting around 1950. They're sitting around the table. They're probably chain smoking. Yom Revi'i, it's a Wednesday, Chav Tammuz Tavshin Yud, the 5th of July of 1950, Yerushalayim Binyan HaKnesset, Sha'ah 14:35. It's 2:35 in the afternoon. Everybody is sitting down. They have Chok Hashvut Tavshin Yud. They are discussing the Yoshev Rosh, the chairman, is getting together to discuss the Chok Hashvut, the law of return, which is it's about to become law, as you'll see in a moment. It's one of the most consequential pieces of legislation in the history of the modern state of Israel. Parenthetically, when you go through some of these Yoshev Rosh, these yeshivot of the Knesset, some of them are really just interesting, comical. You have all kinds of characters who are speaking up about all kinds of topics. This is the Chok HaShvut, one of the most consequential pieces of legislation. I was looking through other legislative sessions that relate to the Chok HaShvut, and I found sessions where they're discussing bathing suits that were manufactured outside of Israel and the import, and dealing with milk and prices. And like, they deal with everything in the Knesset, everything. It's a political body. But here you have a historic session. And this session, the 5th of July. So we go down a couple of pages later here. It's cropped down on the bottom part of the screen. Hatza'at Chok HaShvut, the proposal for a law of return. And what is that? It has 6 components, and then I didn't give you on the page, but you can find it online. The deliberation of the Knesset, a little emendations, little amendments, slight changes to the law. Here's the basic. Kol, the first one, period. Hazchut la'aliyah. The zchut to come on aliyah. Kol Yehudi zakai la'alos arza. Every Jew has the right, the zchus is zakai, permitted to come on aliyah to Eretz Yisrael. Number 2, oshras ha'oleh. Ha'aliyah tiyalpi oshras oleh, and oshras oleh tinasin l'chol Yehudi. Every Jew has this opportunity, she'abiyas ritzono, that expressed interest, l'shtakeh b'Yisrael. If he wants to live there, he can, except number 1, if the person, this person who confirms they want to live in Israel is number 1, po'el neged ha'am ha'yehudi, he is subverting the Jewish people, or he is to misakein brios hatzibur, he is a danger to this society. And in addition, number 3, any Jew you see who's Zvali Yisrael comes to Israel, and after he comes, he decides he wants to stay in Israel, he can receive a Tudat Oleh. He can become an Oleh, the same limitation. Now, number 4, the technical things. Somebody who requests an Aliyah, but then doesn't answer and then he doesn't get an answer, he can petition the court to get his acknowledgement of Aliyah. Number 5, Toshavim v'Yeladim. Anybody who was a Jew who came to Israel before this law was passed is as if they came on Aliyah right now. And number 6, the Sar HaAliyah is responsible for executing and implementing this law. So this is the famous Chok HaShvut, the law of return, established in 1950, that if you are a Jew and you want to live in Israel, you can come to Israel, and then you can decide right then and there, and you are allowed to be an Oleh, or you can decide later on, everything is fine and good. Until comes March of 1958, and we have a little bit of an issue. That issue is that the Minister of the Interior, the Sar HaPnim, Yisrael Bar Yehuda, who's pictured on your screen for those who are watching, Yisrael Bar Yehuda sends out a memo. And the memo relates to this issue of determining Jewishness for purposes of registration. The Sar HaPnim, the Minister of Interior, is registering people. So how do you register someone? Well, The Chok HaShvut says that people can come on Aliyah if they're Jewish. So you register them as Jewish. They make Aliyah. Great. It wasn't an issue so much on the Aliyah side until the registration side, when Yisrael Bar Yehuda sent a memo and he said, oh, anybody who shows up and wants to register as a Jew can register as a Jew. And they say, someone comes and says, that's all you need. This was picked up and caused a huge political fury. You see on the picture on the screen, this is a picture from the Israeli government. On the left side, you see David Ben Gurion. Next to him is Yosef Berg, and next to him is Chaim Moshe Shapira. Yosef Berg and Chaim Moshe Shapira, Zichronim Levracha, were two Chavrei HaKnesset, two members of parliament who were very prominent politicians who represented the Mafdal. You know, that party changes names in different ways at different times, but they represented the National Religious Party, the religious Zionist community in the Knesset. And they said, wait a second, what does that mean exactly? What exactly does that mean that anybody who says they're Jewish, so we register them as Jewish? Who says? People just decide they're Jewish and they can register as Jewish? What about people who are intermarried? What about people who have no documentation? What about people who like, how did that become that people just... So this kicked off a huge fury to the point where in June of 1958, these Chavrei HaKnesset, Yosef Berg and Chaim Moshe Shapira, resigned from the government. They resigned from Ben Gurion's coalition, and it created a crisis. So now you have a huge national issue putting on the table of how do you figure out how to register people who are either intermarried or they have no documentation. And so back and forth, you can imagine all the political machinations here until we get to this yeshiva in the Knesset, which you see on the screen, HaYeshiva HaArbameot V'Tishim V'Arba Shel HaKnesset HaShlishit, the meeting of the third Knesset, which is which meeting? It's 494, which is the second meeting of the day. There was one earlier, 493, and this is 494. You can get all the documents online. We're just looking at a snippet of it. Yom Shlishi, it's a Tuesday, the 27th of Tammuz, Tafshin Yudches, the 15th of July, 1958, Yerushalayim Binyan HaKnesset. We're still on King George, 8 p.m., Sha'ah 20. Hoda'at Rosh HaMemshalah, the Rosh HaMemshalah informed the Knesset earlier, al hitpatrut hasarim, on the quitting, lehitpater means to quit, of the sarim, the ministers, Memches Shapira ve'Yud Berg. Yosef Rosh, you see, Sharabi, and he's inviting the prime minister to open the Knesset to speak first. And this is going to be the suggestion. Rosh HaMemshalah, David Ben Gurion. Adoni HaYoshev Rosh Chavrei HaKnesset. Ulai Aftia Chavrei HaKnesset. You can picture Ben Gurion with his soft tufts of white hair, now already elderly, 1958. Maybe I will surprise you. And he's going to get into the polemic here. Maybe I will surprise you. Ulai Aftia Chavrei HaKnesset. In any odeim egromach zavav hana'ah. I do not know if I will cause disappointment or enjoyment. Bakach im omar, if I say shelo ashmi'a apam advarim shaya bedati lomar b'siyum v'kuakum lalzeh, that I'm not going to say what I think about this pathetic debate. Ki beintayim, in the meantime, other important things are going on, and we have to deal with those security-wise. Estapek, next paragraph, kach, I will just suffice with this. B'mesirat hachlatat hamemshalah, I will say two things. Two things. Second line. There's no place where Judaism is as rooted, as truthful, as substantial, substantive, and as original as in Israel. And I've said not once, this is a country of law and not a country of halakha. All of the political parties who are here committed themselves by signing the Declaration of Independence of Israel, the 14th of May 1948, al chofesh matzpun v'dat, on freedom of conscience and religion. So the state of Israel believes in the freedom of religion. So what does it mean? Then how do we deal with this registration of Jews, of the Chok HaShvut? Of what does it mean to be a Jew? Who is a Jew? This is the decision. L'kvoa, this is it. You can imagine the drama. L'kvoa va'ada shel shlosha, to establish a subcommittee of three men, three people. Rosh HaMemshala, me, David Ben Gurion, the DBG. Sar HaPnim, the Interior Minister. V'Sar HaMishpatim, and the Justice Minister. L'vchon u'lenaseach hanchayot rishum liyaldei nisurei ta'arovet. How to register children of mixed marriages. These people, shehoreihem, that their parents, rotzim l'shom yaldeihem tu Yehudim, they want to register their children as Jews, Yehudim. Vadat HaShlosha, this group of three, this is it, Rabbosai. Tishma Chavas Das will listen to the input, the opinion Shel Chachmei Yisrael, of the wise of the Jewish people, Ba'aretz u'v'chutz la'aretz b'nidon zeh, in Israel and outside of Israel, in this issue. U'tenaseach horaos rishum, and it will establish guidelines for registration, sheyas'imu gam l'mesoros ha'mechubeles b'chol chugei ha'yahadus, that is acceptable across all sections, chugim of Judaism. Ha'adukim v'achofshim, those who are tightly connected, and those who are free, l'chol zormeim. V'gam l'tanaim, and to the conditions ha'miyuchadim shel Yisrael, k'medina Yehudis ribonis, as a Jewish state, shemuftach b'chofesh matzmo v'daso k'merkaz kibbutz kaluyos. To figure out how to address this issue of who is a Jew in a context in which the state of Israel is promised to be a place where people have freedom of conscience and religion, and it is a place of kibbutz galios. This announcement is the precursor to our letter, the letter of David Ben Gurion, to try to ascertain from Chachmei Yisrael their opinion on how do we register people as Jews in the modern state of Israel. So now we arrive on October 27th, 1958. For those of you who have it in your email, you could pop it up. You have the English and the Hebrew. I'm going to zoom in here, and we're going to go through very briefly. We're not going to read all the words of all the pages, but here you have in front of you this letter, and I'm going to put it on the screen bigger, the letter of David Ben Gurion to the Chachmei Yisrael. And now we understand why he's writing this letter and this incredible, fundamental, historic significance of what this means for our people, for the Jewish people, for Klal Yisrael, for Am Yisrael. Because if this is the place of kibbutz galios where we're all going to come back together, so how do we figure out how to exist as a family? How do you balance being a democratic, free society, but also being a Jewish state? So now we look at the letter itself. We're going to summarize it, and this is the letter that you're opening in your mailbox. This is the letter whose answers and the ramifications of this letter we are going to study over the course of this year. If you want to find more about this letter, if you want to see the letter online on your own, you go, there is a, I don't know if you can see it here. There is a website, the Israel Museum has a website of the Israel State Archives from the Misrad Rom Shemem Shalah of important documents, and this is one of them. And so Ben Gurion says, Ani poneh el kvodo, I am addressing. So this is l'chvod, and we're going to talk in the future about who got this letter. It's more than 50 people, so we're going to deal with that later. But right now, today, we're just focusing on the letter. Ani poneh el kvodo, I am looking to you, sir, kind sir. Be'ikvos hachlatas, in the light of the decision, Asher Memshalas Yisrael Kibla B'yom, July 15th, 1958, which is exactly what we saw in the proceedings of the Knesset. We decided in the Knesset to establish a va'ada, a subcommittee of the Rosh Memshalah, Sar Mishpatim, and Sar Apnim that will give guidance of how to deal with children who are of mixed marriages whose parents want to register them as Jews. And we decided we would ask Chavas Dashal Chachmei Yisrael. And therefore, we are asking you, based on exactly what we saw. He uses the same language that we saw in the proceedings of the Knesset in the opening of this letter. He says, let's start at the beginning. Mirsham HaToshavim Kayam BiYisrael, the registration of Jews, of people living in Israel, Me'oz Tavshin Tes V'ad Hayom Hazeh, from the beginning of the state until now, Ve'al HaPratim Asher HaChog Mechayeves Rishumam Zeh, and the way that the law requires people be registered, this is going to be crucial for our discussions. Nimim Gam, they are identified as Dat U Le'um. If you get an identity card in the state of Israel in 1949, 1950, 1958, there are two lines. One says, what's your religion, your Dat, and what is your Le'um, your nationality? And the application of this law, Bitzua Chok Mirsham HaToshavim, is given to the Misrad HaPnim and all of the officers in the Misrad HaPnim. Now, you can imagine one of the things I think about when I think about this letter and the Misrad HaPnim, in the old days, now it's not so much, but the Pkidim, government officers, especially in Israel, the stamping, they've got papers and stamps and lots more stamps and staples. You remember when you used to come to Israel, well, years ago, before all the biometrics and everything, they were stamping papers, every stamp you can imagine, 5 stamps, 10 stamps. So Gurion says those people are in charge of the stamps. They're in charge of lining up who and how people are registered as Jews. They're registered in religion and they're registered in nationality. Mismachim v'yiduim v'yidiot. Historically, people have brought documentation, and based on that documentation, people get Tu'udat Zihui. They get what we call Tu'udat Zihui. They get an identity card that has many uses. And Ubishas Chirum, and in case of emergency, some people, says Gurion, are even potentially even all of the state of Israel are required to carry this Tu'udat Zehut with them, wherever you go. So, he says, there have been suggestions over time, next paragraph, to get rid of this recognition of Rishum of Das o Le'um. However, security purposes, and think about this, remember, security means as it relates to internal security in Israel, but also Jews who are living abroad, Israelis who are traveling different places, who are trapped. There are all kinds of potential security needs. He says, for shikulim, bitchoniyim, and others, we are not going to take away that identification of somebody being a Jew. Also think about writing down that you are a Jew. For these people, many of these people brings back a lot of memories. Many of them are European refugees, Holocaust survivors. So it's not such a pashut thing. Gurion says, we're not going to take away right now that reality. And therefore, La'or Matzavenu HaMiyuchad, in light of this unique circumstance, and so because we can't, כשאין אפשרות מעשית לבקח פיקוח של קבע ושל ממש על כל גבולות המדינה בפני אנשים המסתננים אל המדינה מן הארצות השכנות האויבים לנו. We have people who are seeping into our borders, potentially endangering us. We have to have people who are identified in this way. Now, says Gurion in the next paragraph, wait a second, well, what about the nature of our state? Of course, he says, Chukei Yisrael, the laws of Israel, Osrim kol haflaya. Haflaya means discrimination between people because of their geza, their race, their color, la'um, das, omin, any orientation. However, kayemet zchus yeser, there is an extra zchus, an extra perk, a benefit, a right, achas, one, hamyucheres leYehudim bilvad, which is unique to Jews, to Yehudim, lefi chok hashvus. And that is based on the law of return. Lo Yehudi, somebody who's a goy, who's not Jewish, who wants to apply to become a citizen of Israel, he has to apply and he could potentially be accepted or rejected. However, any Jew has the right to la'alos, third line from the end of the paragraph here, la'eretz lefi chukas shvus. As long as he is a Jew, betokav hayoso yudi, as long as, of course, he's not endangering. And not only that, next paragraph. Gam kvias hadas, the establishment of religion, gabe toshavei Yisrael, establishing somebody as a Jew for living in Israel, is also important, not just because they have the right to live here because of the Chol Kashvus, but also in Yanei Nisuim, marriage issues, gerushin, divorce, Nisunim lafi chokei Yisrael hakayamim lisamchutam shel batei hadin datiyim. And also, says Ben Gurion, we need to know who's a Jew, because for issues not just related to registration of Aliyah, but related to marriage and divorce, which is under the purview of the religious courts, to the Batei Hadin, to the Sharia Batei Din for Muslims, Batei Din Datiyim of the Christians, and Batei Din HaRabbaniyim, and the Batei Din of the Rabbaniyim, the rabbis. So now, if we're writing on people's identification cards that they're a Jew, it's going to have nafkamina, we say, for all of these areas, which are, everybody agrees according to the law of Israel, strictly under the purview of the religious establishment. And so, Nisora Sheila, says Ben Gurion, the question came up, Eich l'rshom befrat das ubefrat l'um, how do we register under the section of das, religion, and le'um, nation, yiladim, children, shenoldu midu nisue tarovis, that are from an intermarriage. Kishaha'av Yehudi, when the father is a Jew, v'ha'em lo Yehudiya, and the mother is not Jewish, v'lo niskaira, and she has not converted, but they both want their child to be registered as a Jew. So some say, Yeshomrim, that since this is a secular registration and it doesn't, strictly speaking, pertain to religious matters, so therefore you should just follow whatever the parents say, and it has no religious context at all. V'yeshomrim, and some say, since you can't, that you should not create a distinction or distinguish between das and le'um, and therefore the question of datit, shehistaychut datit, relations, religious identification, is miteva briyasa, is a religious question, so you should follow religious issues. So hamemshalah hechlita, and this is what caused the controversy in March, if you recall, shedavto le'uma shel adam mivugar, that an adult, yirashmu kiyudim etzir b'tom lev shu yudi ve'enu ben das acheres. Adults should be acknowledged as Jews as long as they say b'tom lev sincerely that they are Jewish. Now, this is what caused the whole issue in the first place, because the religious party said that doesn't necessarily make somebody Jewish. That's not sufficient. So that was the background, says Ben Gurion. But now the question is, well, what happens in the question of custody of children? So therefore, b'sha'ei lazu, in this question, last line of the paragraph, we're skipping ahead, nidreshes va'adas hashlosha lahamlitz, this issue, the subcommittee has been asked to give lahamlitz, to give recommendations, hamlat soser lememshala, to the government, la'acha shetikabel chavas das chachmei Yisrael kamur la'el. So I'm going to ask you, says Ben Gurion, here he comes down to the 4 shikulim that he asks, and with this we're going to conclude today with this question. This is the question, and now you see how it's not just a question, it's obviously a problem. It's a huge problem, it's a circumstance, it's a living, breathing conundrum that's facing the Jewish people in this letter in 1958. Number 1, he says, here are 4 shikulim. In the state of Israel and in the Megillat Ha'atzmaut, we have an established principle that the religious parties, everyone agreed to, and that is freedom of religion. There is no coercion of religion or anti-religion. A Jew, number 1, says Ben Gurion, has the right to be dati or lo dati. That's issue number 1. Number 2, The Jewish people are coming in the gathering of exiles. Yisrael mishameshes b'yamenu merkaz l'kibbutz galuyos. The state of Israel serves as a central point of the ingathering of the exiles from everywhere. And therefore, he says, number two, we have to figure out if it's possible to how to avoid mafrid v'amarchik, that which is going to be divisive. So number one, there is freedom of religion. Number two, this is the place of kibbutz golios of the Jewish people. We want to try to be as least divisive as possible. Number three, kibbutz of Jews in Israel is not the same as Jewish communities in Chutz La'aretz. In Chutz La'aretz, you have the threat of secular culture, of assimilation. But he says, we don't have that here. We don't have that here. And in his view, which we're not going to talk about today, but we'll see in the future, in his view, this is an important thing, that whereas intermarriage in Chutz La'aretz is one of the causes of assimilation and people exiting Judaism, in Israel, it says Ben Gurion, from his perspective again, especially people who are coming from Eastern Europe, he says, actually, it encourages people to identify, to stay within the Jewish family. Okay? And number four, on the other hand, we, says Ben Gurion, in the state of Israel and in the land of Israel, do not see ourselves as separate and apart from Jews around the world. Adarabah, we feel an achdus and a zeus in klal hayudim ba'olam. And therefore, this issue of how the state and the government will make sure that there is a Jewish identity and that there is Jewish continuity, and to actually strengthen our ties, says Ben Gurion, between the Jews in Israel and the Jews outside of Israel is very important, wherever they're living. And therefore, says Ben Gurion, we're interested in everybody's opinion because the question of who is a Jew in Israel has nafkaminas for who is a Jew and how every Jew around the world relates to their Judaism and to the state of Israel. L'or kol hanemar, you see a signature at the bottom. In light of everything, niyasirei todah, we would be very grateful, says David Ben Gurion. Im kvodo, if your honor will yo'il lechavas dato, to express your opinion. Kate aleinu linhog, how we should act. Berishum yaldei nisuei taroves, how we should act regarding children of intermarriages. Shishnei orihem, that there are two parents. Gama av Yehudi v'gama im lo Yehudiya rotzim l'rishum yaldehem keYehudim. B'chavod uv'hokara, hand signed, David Ben Gurion. This is the question. This is our question, and this is our problem. Because now that we understand what Ben Gurion is asking, and why he's asking, and what context he's asking, we need to ask ourselves this question. Who is a Jew? Not for historical purposes, but for ourselves. What does it mean to be a Jew? What defines our own Judaism? How did we come to be Jewish, and why is that significant? What's the nafkamina? Why do we care? What are the ramifications of our being Jewish? What are our responsibilities? What are our rights? What's our relationship to Jews in Israel? What do we need to think about for examining our own Judaism? Is it enough to say, oh, who is a Jew? Somebody who is, and we'll talk about this, of course, at great length, somebody whose mother was Jewish. You know, I look around this room, I know people who are here in this shiur learning together, our mother is Jewish. So that's it, that's who is a Jew, and then we end. Do we not ask any further? What does that mean? Who is a Jew? What does it mean to wake up today as a Jew? What does it mean that I am a Yid? What's the nafkamina? What's the implication of that? How does it affect how I identify myself? How does it affect how I lead my life? What's the meaning of my life? What does it mean to be a Jew? And how does that play out? And that's what we really need to think about. What does it mean for somebody who abandons their Judaism? Can they come back? Can we come back? What's our relationship to our Judaism in our life today? This is the question that we're going to be thinking about this year in many different perspectives. And we're going to have the blessing and the advantage of insights and responses from 46 different great Chachmei Yisrael who are going to give us their perspective on this question. And that's going to be a gateway for us to explore who these great people were, what we can learn from them generally, and what are some of the other related issues that will help us build an answer to our own question, that we should start delving into this question, and more importantly, what Heschel called our problem, our challenge, which is being inspired, being connected, being engaged. That's the issue for us. It's not an academic question. This is an existential question. It's a personal question. It's a how we lead our life question. What's happened when we finish this year, and how do we interact with all those around us? What is our relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu? That's the goal for this year. And I thank you all for joining for this morning. And I'm excited and looking forward, Emir Hashem, to continuing the Lima together for the course of the year. Have a great day. Chodesh Tov, a good Zman, and thank you all for coming. Asher Koach.